Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 805, and today is June 2nd, 2025. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. A lot of news to talk about today, major developments over the weekend when it comes to talks with Iran, the situation in Israel for the Palestinians, and most importantly, for the war in Ukraine. So I'm going to be breaking all that down on today's show and more. You definitely want to share this episode of Conflicts of Interest. Additionally, help me out by subscribing to the Kyle Anzalone Show. This is my all-new show, high quality. I got a producer, guest on every episode. I'm getting great feedback on it. I have a really major guest coming on today's episode. It will be live at 4:45 Eastern Time. I would love to have a big audience for him. And so if you can, subscribe to the show, share the show out. It will really help us out. And it's the first link in the show notes page, by the way, so very easy to find. Let's get into today's news. Starting off with a couple stories that I wrote in the past few days on the Trump administration relationship with military contractors. The first is Palunteer. White House taps Palunteer for government-wide database of Americans. So in a move raising red flags with civil rights organizations, the Trump administration is working with the tech firm Palunteer to develop a database for numerous government agencies to collect and store information on all Americans. According to the New York Times report published Friday, a key Palunteer product known as Foundry has been used by at least 4 federal agencies, including the Department of Homeland Security and Health and Human Services. The firm is now speaking with other cabinet-level agencies. The widespread use of Foundry across the federal government will allow a number of agencies to access hundreds of data points on civilians and others through government databases, including their bank account numbers, the amount of student debt, their medical claims, and any disability status. The program has caused concern among civil rights and former Palunteer employees. One former Palunteer official said, "Data that is collected for one reason should not be repurposed for other uses. Combining all the data, even with the noblest intentions, significantly increases the risk of misuse." Immigration and Customs Enforcement, as well as the IRS and Social Security Administration, are all expected to have access to the database. The system will work with Palunteer's Gotham software, which is designed to analyze behavior patterns in real time, flag potential threats, and support decisions around public safety and fraud detection, the Economic Times reported. Additionally, Palunteer has a contract with Fannie Mae. I believe it's Fannie Mae, which is a government-linked mortgage broker, and I guess they're going to use this software in this program as well. So in a statement posted on the company's blog, Palunteer attempted to downplay its role in the project, saying, "We act as a data processor, not a data controller. Our software and services are used under direction from the organizations that license our products. These organizations define what can and cannot be done with their data. They control Palunteer accounts, which analysts is conducted." And this would be like Lockheed Martin or Raytheon saying, "We just sell the bombs. I mean, we allow Israel, or we sell these bombs to Israel, and what they do with them is completely up to them. We say that these bombs are only supposed to be used for X, Y, and Z purposes and not committing a genocide. But if a company does, what can you do? Not on us." This is obviously a very hollow and stupid argument to make. So since Trump returned to office, Palunteer has wrapped up over $100 million in government contracts, and the firm is slated to strike nearly $800 million deal with the Pentagon. Palunteer is also a major contractor for the Ukrainian and Israeli governments. The company's stock increased 5% after the New York Times story revealed the contract, and it's up 150% since Trump won the election. Palunteer co-founders Peter Thiel and Alex Karp have both been confronted over their work with the Israeli Defense Forces as Tel Aviv ethnically cleanses Palestinians from Gaza. The co-founders defended their relationship with Tel Aviv, and so, of course, on that point. Next up here, our old friend Eric Prince. Eric Prince working with Haitian government in fight against armed groups. I wrote this one for the Institute on May 29th. So the U.S. installed government in Haiti has turned to American mercenaries, including Blackwater founder Eric Prince, to fight against armed groups that now control nearly all of Port-au-Prince. Drones operated by Prince's firm has killed hundreds, but no high-value targets. So according to the New York Times, Prince's company has been operating drones in Haiti since March in operations aimed at killing gang members. The Times notes that the Haitian government has not announced any successful operations linked to the program. Pierre Esperance, who leads the National Human Rights Defense Network in Haiti, told the Wall Street Journal that more than 300 people have been killed in drone strikes over the past 3 months. Additionally, Prince is ramping up for larger operations that would see 150 mercenaries sent to Haiti this summer and has already shipped arms to the nation. While now called Constellus Holdings, Prince's defense contracting firm was initially named Blackwater. The company became infamous in 2007 when its mercenaries opened fire on civilians in Iraq, killing 17. Prince is a longtime ally of the U.S. president, and the Mercs responsible for murdering the Iraqi civilians were ultimately pardoned by Trump during his first term. Details of the agreement between Prince and the Haitian government are unknown. While the State Department denied that it is currently paying Prince, the U.S. continues to fund the Haitian police forces and Kenyan soldiers deployed to the country to help the government regain control over the capital city. The current government in Port-au-Prince was installed by Washington last year after the collapse of the Ariel Henry administration. Henry was forced from power after he left Port-au-Prince to sign an agreement with the Kenyan government that allowed Nairobi to deploy its troops to Haiti. Henry was Washington's choice to lead Port-au-Prince after the assassination of Haitian President Jovenel Moïse in 2001. Under Henry's rule, gangs and armed groups increasingly took control over Port-au-Prince, leading the Biden administration to bat the Kenyan deployment to restore order. However, the presence of Kenyan forces has not changed the tide in Port-au-Prince, as gains have only grown stronger over the past year. Last month, Human Rights Watch reported that the Haitian government now only controlled 10% of the capital city, and the gangs were pushing into middle and upper class areas of the city. So, the U.S. intervention there continues to fail, and it seems like, Prince may be able to kill a lot of people, maybe even, gang members, and I'm sure these are young men, maybe 18, 19, probably younger, who born into poverty, had not many choices in life. Maybe they were effectively conscripted into these gangs because, that's how the neighborhood is or something like that. And killing these low-level gang members is probably not going to fundamentally change anything, especially as the people of Haiti become terrified of this U.S. mercenaries drone war. All right, so the big and disturbing, very disturbing story that we have today: Ukraine targets Russian airfields in major drone attack. So the Security Service of Ukraine, the SBU, conducted a large-scale drone attack deep inside Russian territory on Sunday that targeted several Russian airfields. The Russian Defense Ministry said the attack targeted 5 Russian regions, including an oblast in Russia's far east, which is over 3,000 miles from Ukraine, and a base in the Urstak Oblast, over 2,500 miles from the Ukrainian border. The attack also targeted other regions in the western oblast of Ukraine. The Russian Defense Ministry said that several aircraft caught fire, and the attacks were launched in exact proximity to the airfields in the region. The Defense Ministry said the attacks were repelled in other 3 regions, and no casualties were reported among service members or civilians. Some of those involved in the terrorist attacks were detained, the Defense Ministry claimed. The Ukrainian official told Reuters that the SBU was able to pull off the attack by hiding explosive-laden drones inside the roofs of wooden sheds. The sheds were then loaded onto trucks and driven near the bases, and the roof panels were lifted off by remote activation mechanism, allowing the drones to fly out. Videos surfacing on social media show drones flying out of a truck near one of the air bases. Officials said the attack was planned for more than a year and claimed it destroyed 41 Russian aircraft, including the Tu-95 long-range bombers, though the number hasn't been confirmed by the Russian side. The Ukrainian President Zelensky described the attack as a brilliant operation in his nightly address. He said, "It took place on enemy territory and was aimed exclusively at military targets, specifically the equipment used in the strikes against Ukraine. Russia suffered truly significant losses, entirely justified and deserved." So U.S. and Ukrainian officials claim that the Trump administration was not notified ahead of the attack, although the CIA is deeply involved with the SBU and helped build up Ukraine's intelligence following the 2014 U.S.-backed coup that ousted former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych. Also on Monday, a Russian missile strike on a Ukrainian military site killed 12 Ukrainian troops and wounded 60. Ukrainian officials said that on Sunday, Russia launched 472 drones at Ukraine overnight, marking the largest Russian drone barrage of the war. Now, Ukraine has also attacked some bridges and railways in Ukraine, but let's kind of break all of this down now, particularly these drone attacks on the Russian bombers. Now, for Zelensky to say that this was justified, that was a major blow, all true. You know, Russia is waging an aggressive war against Ukraine. And my opposition to the U.S. support for this is, first, as a principled non-interventionist, but also the understanding of the long-term effects of this war. It's just getting worse and worse and worse for Ukraine. And there were plenty of off-ramps for the United States to help the Ukrainians get a pretty good deal and to end this conflict with minimal to no bloodshed. And we never took that and provoked Russia to invade Ukraine. But that doesn't mean that Ukraine isn't justified in fighting back against Russia. Now, I think the real question here for the Ukrainian side, for the Ukrainian people, has to be, practically, does this help them to get a better deal? Does this help them to end the war on more favorable terms? And the answer is absolutely no. Now, for those of you who would like to read about this, it will be the subject of my email that goes out every day at the Libertarian Institute, which you could subscribe to on the homepage at the Libertarian Institute. And I think this was a major victory for NATO, not Ukraine. Let me explain why. So taking out these Russian long-range bombers is going to cost Russia a lot of money. I'm sure losing this many, at least in the short term, does significantly change their war plans for, you know, what happens if we go to nuclear war with the US, UK, France, NATO, Europe. All of these questions, I'm sure that this has caused a lot of panic. It's going to cost Russia a lot of money. They're going to have to do a lot of repurposing within their aerospace industry to replace these planes rather than, you know, working on spending money on future projects. And so I think there's a real cost to Putin here, and that this is a real victory for the West in the sense of, you know, Russia is going to have to dedicate resources to repairing these. And look, the West says that we're not prepared to fight a war against Russia right now. And so if the goal of NATO is to make sure that Russia also isn't prepared to fight a war against NATO, then this probably to some degree helped to achieve those ends. Now, for the Ukrainian side, is this maybe going to help to some degree lessen any kind of Russian bombs and attacks dropped on Ukraine? Maybe. I'm not sure that that's what Russia was using these bombers for. From reports that I read, that really wasn't the case. You know, Russia is using a lot of drones. They are dropping bombs on Ukraine, of course, and they have bombers and fighter jets capable of doing that. They're launching missiles. And so I think if I were a Ukrainian citizen, I don't know if I would exactly be happy that my government did this. Sure, it's going to force Russia to repurpose, again, like with the NATO side, some of its military objectives and things like that. But if you look at what's going on in Ukraine, what's causing damage, the missiles, the drones, the fact that Russia just has a lot more troops. They didn't kill any Russian troops in this attack, right? This is a war of attrition. This war that Russia is winning is because they have more drones, because they have more artillery, because they have more manpower. And that doesn't And this is something that Danny Davis explained on his show Deep Dive. Nothing that Ukraine did, for all the damage that they did to Russia, for however much this is going to cost, for whatever setbacks were done to Russia, it doesn't fundamentally change the dynamics of power, the balance of power when it comes to the actual conflict on the ground in Ukraine. And because of that, it doesn't meaningfully help the Ukrainians. It's not going to help them to get a better deal. In fact, I think in some sense it may do the opposite. Who knows what discussions are occurring right now in the Russian Defense Ministry and in the Kremlin, but I would imagine there are many Russians who are pushing Putin to drastically escalate this war, to completely forgo diplomacy, to say there's no reason to achieve a diplomatic settlement anymore, and do everything in their power to take out and destroy the Ukrainian state. Are there conversations about the Russian ministry using a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine? I wouldn't be surprised at this point in time, given the success of this attack and how many attacks of Ukraine are landing in Russia. And just forget, this comes just a few days after the German chancellor was saying that there's no restrictions on the weapons that the West gives to Ukraine. And while the West may deny, the US may deny, even Kiev may deny that Washington or Berlin or London or Paris played a major role in this attack, I think it's likely that they did, that they certainly helped with the intelligence and other things like that. And the Russians, even if it's not true, that the Russians will believe that they did. And so I think that this actually hurts the Ukrainian side, because again, the Ukrainian side at this point is just trying to get the best deal possible to end this war. That has to be the goal. There could be no mistake that, and admissions from all parties now, that look, Ukraine is never going to be able to take back and drive all the Russian troops out of Ukraine. And I saw somebody point this out on X, that look, the fact that Ukraine took 18 months to pull off this mission means it's not something that's sustainable, something they could replicate time and time again to inflict meaningful losses onto Russia. And so this isn't going to tip the power or change the balance of power in the war. It is really going to piss off the Russians at the Ukrainians, and there's likely major retaliation coming to the Ukrainians. From this, again, I do think that NATO should celebrate, and so while Ukraine will bleed, Brussels will party. Now, two other things here. 2 bridges collapsed in Russia's border regions, killing 7. And so this was pretty clearly an attack on a civilian target by the Ukrainians. That being said, attacking the rail lines near the front lines probably has, and this probably had far more of an impact in benefiting the Ukraine side as they try to repel the Russian offensive that's currently underway, than taking out all those bombers did, because so much of the Russian war machine does rely on the rail lines. And so, they killed civilians here. It's awful. At the same time, Russia is using the same infrastructure to wage attacks on Ukraine. And I just find it so interesting that I would guess that this, again, provides a bigger benefit to Ukraine in repelling the Russian attack than the bombers. And of course, the other story is the one getting all the attention. Next up here, moving on to the Middle East, this one from Dave DeCamp. Israeli defense minister says, we will build Jewish Israeli state in the West Bank. So the Israeli defense minister, Israel Katz, said that Israel would build a Jewish Israeli state in the occupied West Bank. Katz's comments come a day after the Israeli government approved 22 additional West Bank settlements, which are illegal under international law. The approval marked the biggest single settlement expansion in more than 30 years, according to the Israeli settlement watchdog Peace Now. Katz said that the settlement expansion was a response to French President Emmanuel Macron and other world leaders who have been considering recognizing a Palestinian state. He said, this is a decisive response to the terrorist organizations that are trying to harm and weaken our hold on this land, and a clear message to Macron and his associates that they will recognize a Palestinian state on paper, but we will build a Jewish Israeli state here on the ground. And so this is important because it just goes to show that Israel is, it's not just about Hamas. It's not just about Israeli security. It's not just about Gaza. It's about ethnic cleansing. It's about creating a Jewish state on what once was a majority Muslim area. And to do that, they are driving out the Muslim population. All right. So next up here, Marco Rubio says vigorous new visa policy will prevent Israeli credits from entering the U.S. So Secretary of State Marco Rubio said on Wednesday that he was implementing a vigorous new visa policy to prevent people from entering the U.S. who are critical of Israel, which he conflates with anti-Semitism. And this is just horrific and a brutal violation of the First Amendment. Trump said and declared early on in his administration, I think his first State of the Union, this is, we're going to restore the First Amendment. The war on free speech is over. And I think it is all the deplorable things the Biden administration did, all the awful attacks on free speech through the COVID area with the war in Ukraine, the whole, you can't, it has to be an unprovoked invasion, 2 weeks to flatten the curve, the masking, the vaccine stops the spread, all these things that were, awful propaganda. This expelling people based on their beliefs is highly disturbing and must be resisted by people who support freedom. All right, next up here, moving on to Iran talks. This first one from our friend Will Porter at antiwar.com on May 30th. Trump says new Iran deal must allow U.S. to blow up whatever we want. So President Trump argued that any revised nuclear accord with Iran should permit the United States to destroy the country's nuclear infrastructure and send inspectors to Iranian facilities at any time. The president outlined his vision for a new agreement during the White House presser on Wednesday, calling for a very strong document that would effectively give Washington carte blanche over Tehran's nuclear energy program. He told reporters, I want it very strong, where we can go in with inspectors, we can take whatever we want, we can blow up whatever we want, but with nobody getting killed. We can blow up a lab, but nobody is going to be in the lab, as opposed to everybody being in the lab and blowing it up. And so this is, a really wild statement from Donald Trump. And again, when we're talking about these Iran talks, there's always the possibility that the public and the private positions of the Trump administration are drastically different. And while the Trump administration is talking with the Iranians about a deal that resembles the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, that was signed during the Obama era, that of course did not give the U.S. Permission to blow up Iranian nuclear sites, or Iran would have never signed on to it. Trump is just, blustering in public and putting out this very hawkish statement to basically defend his right flank and to prevent Senators Graham, Cotton, Fetterman, Schumer, and the rest of the Zionist hawks in the Senate from passing bills that says, Trump can't make a new Iran deal with Iran unless it gives him all these, denies Iran the right to uranium enrichment and things like that. So that's always possible, but the language he's using here certainly seems like it's almost intended to blow up the talks. If the Iranians are going to allow Americans into any of their nuclear facilities, and then Trump is saying we're going to blow up any of your facilities that we want, the Iranians are never going to agree to this, and rightly so. And we will see what happens here, but I think this is a bad sign, particularly combined with this next article from Will Porter. Saudi Arabia urges Iran to reach nuclear deal with U.S. or risk attack. So Saudi defense minister informed Iran that a failure to strike a nuclear agreement with the U.S. could prompt an Israeli attack, and multiple sources told this to Reuters. Washington and Tehran have struggled to reach a new deal since Trump had scrapped the last pact in 2018. The covert message was relayed to by the Saudi defense chief and the brother of the crown prince, Khalil bin Salman, during a visit to Iran in mid-April. Reuters reported on Friday, citing 2 unnamed Iranian officials and 2 sources close to the Saudi government. The Iranian president and foreign minister and the chief of staff of their armed forces were all reportedly present during the meeting, which marked the first visit to Iran by a senior Saudi royal in 30 years. According to the sources, bin Salman warned the Iranian leadership that U.S. President Donald Trump had little patience for drawn-out negotiations, and the window of diplomacy would close fast if a deal would not reach quickly. And I'm not sure. My guess is that this is like a Trump art of the deal style negotiation tactic where he thinks sending this message via the Saudis to Iran is going to help push Iran into a deal quicker. I think it's going to have the opposite effect. Next up here, this one from Jason Ditz, May 31st, antiwar.com. Quarterly IAEA report on Iran fuels another round of media panic. And so basically what Jason is saying here is that the IAEA puts out reports that just details Iran's nuclear program. And of course, Iran is enriching uranium at 60%. And because since the US has sanctions on their export of enriched uranium, Iran has a growing stockpile of 60% enriched uranium. And so every time one of these reports come out, the mainstream press basically takes it and says, oh, Iran is this much closer to a bomb, when the U.S. intelligence community says Iran isn't working on a nuclear weapon. And so this is just dishonesty from the U.S. media. Under Trump, it's particularly dangerous dishonesty, since who knows if the president reads this and decides that Iran is trying to build a nuclear weapon and then okays an Israeli attack on Tehran or something like this. Next up here, U.S. reopens ambassador's residence in Damascus in a sign of warming ties. And so this is just another detail in what we've been talking about in the U.S. accepting and embracing the al-Qaeda leader of Syria, Abu Mohammed al-Jolani, or as he now goes by, Ahmed al-Shara, and welcoming into the international fold. Now, look, I don't want Syria as a state and all the Syrian people to be deprived from the international economy as they have been over the past decade and a half. However, openly embracing a jihadist like this is extremely dangerous and should raise a lot of red flags. Last up here, Yemen's Houthis fire missile at Israel a day after Israeli strikes on Sana'a airport. So Dave wrote this one at the end of last week. Yemen's Houthis fired another missile at Israel on Thursday, a day after Israelis' airstrikes hit the Sana'a International Airport. The Israeli ministry said that the intercepted missile, after sirens sounded across central Israel. According to Israeli media, the incident marked the fifth Yemeni missile attack on Israel within a week. The Houthis, officially known as Ansar Allah, said the missile targeted Israel's Ben Gurion airport. Several major airlines have suspended flights to the airport amid the repeated Houthi attacks, which, I'm surprised the Houthis have been able to continue to do this for so long. It's, quite militarily impressive. And, just thinking of the Ukrainian attack on Russia and other, non-state actors or state actors like the Houthis and Hezbollah, other groups, may look at what Ukraine was able to do and start to devise their own similar attacks on Israel. And so I think the Israelis have a lot to worry about here. They're making a lot of enemies, and they're showing that, even if they can't beat back Hezbollah, the Houthis continue to present a pretty major problem. All right, everybody, that'll do it for the show today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We'll be back with more episodes of Conflicts of Interest later this week, and new episodes of the Kyle Anzalone Show today at 4:45 Eastern Time, and then Wednesday, same time. Thanks, everyone.